as we do most every Tuesday, we check in inside the Beltway with Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Caught up a little bit before the show today and said there's not a lot to talk about. So where to even start? Let's just backtrack a little bit to everything we know now. The weekend shows, the weekend press, I mean, was it completely dominated by who these indictments were going to be? And did anyone hit the nail on the head?
No, at least not in terms of importance. So the expectation was that the indictments would either be Michael Flynn or Paul Manafort, and in fact, Paul Manafort was indicted. But the news that's far more significant, not only to Mueller's investigation, but also to the story of collusion, is the guilty plea of George Papadopoulos, which came out throughout the course of reading about the indictment. So it's not so much that Paul Manafort was clearly engaging in tax evasion and some other crimes. It's that the low-level employee, or a volunteer, I guess is the White House is calling him, Papadopoulos, has been cooperating with the FBI now for months, pled guilty, and is probably either wearing a wire or taking phone calls.
So that whole wire, let's talk about that. I mean, are there a lot of people in D.C. who might be nervous right now? Just from, I mean, not in the broad sense of the term, but, anyone that Papadopoulos has had contacts with, I mean, you got to wonder, was he wired up?
Right. So I think anybody that's ever had any contact with him should be nervous. And also keep in mind that DC law is that you only need one person to agree to the wire to record it, right? So you can be completely taken aback when you find out that calls were recorded or that a conversation you had has now been sent back to the FBI. And, the Trump administration and some of the spokespeople can say anything that they want about Papadopoulos not having a lot of influence during the campaign or in the early pieces of the administration, but if he actually had conversations with high-ranking people, that not only could be a problem for the administration, but it also undercuts their argument that they had no idea who this guy was, and he was just this, really young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed volunteer.
And so what of Manafort? That he turns himself in, kind of Trump does a little mini victory lap because he said, was not during the time he was my campaign manager. What happens to Manafort?
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, he's in home arrest, but he has $10 million bail, which my understanding is the same amount of bail that Bernie Madoff had to post. So we're talking about major crime. In addition to that, though, we've also got a situation where the raid that they did on Paul Manafort's house demonstrates that they're going to play hardball, and it's not going to be sufficient for the Trump administration just to say that they haven't really been following what's been going on with him.
And so Papadopoulos, in talking about him, potentially having worn the wire, again, the guilty plea, what does that mean for him? Jennifer, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get Jennifer right back here for you.
Live.
Okay, thanks. Welcome back. Jennifer, appreciate your hanging in there with us, talking about everything going on inside the Beltway right now. We talked about Manafort. We talked about Papadopoulos. Let's talk about sort of what's next. There's concerns, as we said, that folks who had conversations with Papadopoulos might be very concerned. But, that leading up into the weekend, that piece of information that sort of got leaked out, that indictments were forthcoming, do we even have a sense of what's next?
I don't think we know in particular who will be the next person to be indicted, but there are two things that we do know. The first is that this investigation is proceeding from both a top-down and bottom-up framework. And by that I mean sort of low-hanging fruit, high-level indictments probably will continue to be issued, but the lower-level people that have the capacity to turn on people who were higher up in this collusion investigation are going to be pursued as well. So I don't think at any point anyone is going to feel like they're off the hook. The second thing that we know is that Bob Mueller is obviously taking this very, very seriously, and he made it very clear in some of the language inside the sealed indictment when it was unsealed that what we saw was only the beginning of what is to be a very long investigation, and Papadopoulos only spoke about a small piece of what he knows. So my sense is that this is going to continue well into the November 2018 elections, which is terrible news for the Republicans.
Well, as we talked, I said, is there anything else going on inside the Beltway right now? I mean, tax reform, other policy issues. What happens now with, again, especially in an administration, there's a little difference between Pennsylvania Ave and Capitol Hill, but just slightly, and with such a fixation on what's going on right now with these indictments.
Well, it's not good news for the president, and it's frankly not good news for tax reform and the Republicans, because tax reform was the one area where I think the expectation was that Donald Trump was going to be able to work the phones and make sure that they had the number of votes that they actually needed. Mm-hmm. And all of the reports yesterday, Donald Trump was in the residence until at least 1 or 2 p.m., seething at the television set. So that's kind of an unfocused president, for good reason in this case. I mean, I would probably be watching what was going on as well, but that doesn't really help tax reform get through. The other thing I would note is every single Republican now, when they're interviewed, when they're on TV, when they're talking to a reporter, is being asked about this and what they think Bob Mueller should be able to do, or whether they're supporting funding the continued investigation. They're not asking about the corporate tax loopholes that they want to close.
And let's talk as well, I think the question was, whether Podesta, what's the Podesta fallout?
I think pretty much nothing. So the timing of the Podesta fallout was completely subsumed by the indictments yesterday, and this general sense of unease because we really don't know what is going to happen further. In addition to that, he has stepped down from his firm, so there's very little, additional recourse or discussion, I think.
And then we had discussed as well the role of Bannon right now, obviously ex-staffer and his role with the media. What's to watch with him?
Well, from all accounts, it seems that Steve Bannon is trying to pressure the president to cut off the legs of Mueller's investigation. And if he can't actually fire Mueller, then certainly to encourage Congress to defund the investigation. And no Republican is going to agree with that at this point, because it looks bad enough when you're saying that you don't support the investigation in the first place. It seems even worse when there seems to now be some evidence that maybe Russia really was colluding with the Trump campaign. So, I mean, Bannon, we know, believes in sort of scorched earth tactics, but this is no longer a political issue. These are now explicitly legal issues. And my sense is that Trump's lawyers are going to be providing him with a different kind of advice, which isn't about how to stay popular or keep his approval ratings up, but more about how to keep everybody in his inner circle out of prison.
And so do we know with Papadopoulos, as we found out that guilty plea, do we know what that holds with it for what he pled guilty to?
We don't, and we also don't know what the terms of the agreement were. My sense is that the more information that he can provide, the more likely it is that those were sort of carrots that he was given in striking this plea. But my understanding is that it's likely going to still involve some degree of jail time. The other thing I would note here is, the Trump administration, Sarah Sanders yesterday, Trump himself said, who the hell is Papadopoulos? If you Google it, you see Donald Trump touting Papadopoulos as this amazing foreign policy expert who at the time really had nothing other than a model UN line on his resume from college. So, it's a little bit far-fetched to suggest that they have no idea who he is.
Do you think someone's secured the movie rights already for this young whippersnapper coming right out of Model UN, cutting deals with the Russians, and finding himself embroiled in the biggest scandal possibly in the 21st century?
I mean, remember when we thought things like House of Cards were fiction? This is actually stranger, and it's remarkable as well, but it's not that surprising when you consider the fact that you had a campaign of very, very inexperienced people who were just sort of believers in Trump's message. And when you don't know how to navigate the political environment and you don't know what to say publicly and what to keep off of email, things like this happen.
Speaking of House of Cards, what we saw this week with Kevin Spacey, that great political show that politicals like to watch, HBO's pulling the plug with what we heard in Kevin Spacey. What's the talk? Are you a House of Cards fan?
I am a House of Cards fan, although I still think the first and second seasons were the best. According to HBO, they had decided that the 6th season would be the final season anyway, and that it had nothing to do with Spacey's announcement. But if that was not the case, I would find it hard to believe that they would be moving forward. The other thing that I'll be watching for is whether, given Spacey's announcement, anybody is willing to watch the show in season 6.
That, I mean, again, that sort of speculate, people always go on social media, talk about the show that they've seen, or try not to be a spoiler, but you're right. I mean, is it all of a sudden a third rail is watching the show, condoning what we hear from reports about Kevin Spacey? When's the new season supposed to come out?
That I'm not sure. I think not until the spring, and so who knows what the world will look like between now and then, and who knows what other horrible, egregious things will have been said. It could be that what Spacey said is just nothing anymore. Every day things seem to get worse. But, but I do think that over the course of the next few months, he's going to have a lot of apologizing to do, probably as part of his contract with HBO.
I would imagine. I mean, I think his comments on the matter were roundly denounced. He acknowledged he couldn't recall what had happened. He kind of came out of the closet a little bit. I mean, could there have been a worse response to an incident such as this?
No, and there were so many dynamics that were terrible, right? The first is sort of coming out of the closet, but sort of not. The second is in some way linking pedophilia to sexual harassment. And then the third is sort of glomming this all into a series of tweets. So, my sense is that there will probably be an apology tour, which we're all accustomed to. He's young enough where he doesn't want his career completely derailed. But, people are paying attention right now to sexual harassment in a way that they haven't in a very long time. And as a result, I think people's tolerance for, sort of talk the way that Spacey spoke has decreased substantially.
So, speaking of what we're going to be keeping an eye on, whatever Kevin Spacey decides to do, but besides just, waiting day in, day out for the next indictment, what are people really looking towards in D.C.? Again, we started off the conversation with this dominating, not just the news cycle, but just, almost everything down there. I mean, is there anything else on the radar screen?
No. No. And frankly, this is the Democrats' dream come true. They shouldn't count their chickens before they hatch their eggs. They should not count. I can't even speak anymore. I'm so excited about this indictment. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. But we're already seeing, I've seen over the course of the last 24 hours, Democrats on various important congressional committees saying that, the Republicans really need to come, and be far more interested now in investigating. It hasn't been a serious investigation until now. They're going to try and use these early indictments as evidence that there's more to take seriously. The one thing that I would note is we saw yet one more member of Congress announce today that he's not seeking re-election. It's possible that for the next month or so, we're going to see it sorting out and we'll have a better idea of what the playing field looks like. Last week it was Jeff Flake from the Senate. This week it's another member from Texas. I think leading up to Thanksgiving, we'll probably have a decent idea of how many seats the Democrats really can pick up and the extent to which those pickups are contingent on this investigation moving forward.
And speaking of it moving forward, we discussed the weekend and the speculation of what could happen Monday morning. And of course, the two names you had tossed out that we all know were sort of on everyone's lips were both Manafort and Mike Flynn. Has there been any talk that, again, could be one of those others in contention? Is he not off the hot seat?
Oh, he's not out of the hot seat. And frankly, Don Jr. and Jared Kushner should probably stay close to home as well. I think all of these names that we've been hearing are names that after the Papadopoulos news was released become that much more interesting because we know that the meeting in Trump Tower, for example, that Don Jr. arranged was likely the fruit of these early Papadopoulos conversations. And so it's no longer enough to say, oh, nothing came of that meeting. If there was some degree of collusion or promised collusion that even set up that meeting, and now it seems that we have some evidence that that's the case, the content of that meeting takes on a whole new meaning.
Well, we're going to be keeping all eyes down inside the Beltway. We're following it closely up here. Appreciate, as always, Jennifer, picking your brain. When's Thanksgiving break start?
I think my last day of teaching is the 17th.
Okay, very good.
I think I'll have a nice little 10-day break.
10-day break, but never a break from politics with everything that's going on down there. So I appreciate your Skyping in, bringing to viewers here what exactly is happening. And it's every week, there's always something, but this might be the penultimate week so far. So I appreciate your Skyping in, and we'll talk with you next week.
Thanks so much.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Jennifer Lawless down at American University, as she does most every Tuesday, Skypes into us here at Go Local in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center to give us a take about the temperature gauge down in the District of Columbia. Ooh, it is hot. We were waiting all weekend to see what would happen. These first charges from the Mueller investigation, seeing Paul Manafort turn himself in, talking about the role of the junior level staffer, Papadopoulos, who we learned pled guilty, the president trying to distance himself from him as these machinations move forward with the investigation. So I'm sure we'll be chatting about this. I can't imagine not in the coming weeks with Jennifer Lawless. As always, appreciate her taking the time to Skype in. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to welcome our next guest here into the studio with a little bit more local politics with a perhaps national flavor. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.